Muy bien, bienvenidos y bienvenidas de regreso. Escuchamos ahora la segunda conferencia magistral de la mañana sobre la importancia de la ética y la gobernanza en el uso y el despliegue de la inteligencia artificial generativa, a cargo de la señora Elizabeth Sylvan, directora ejecutiva del Centro Berkman Klein para Internet y Sociedad de la Universidad de Harvard. Y también está su presentadora, la señora María Isabel Mejía, ejecutiva senior de la Dirección de Transformación Digital CAF, Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina y el Caribe, quien la acompaña en el escenario. Adelante.
Buenos días. Bueno, le quiero dar la bienvenida a Elizabeth Sylvan, es la directora ejecutiva del Berkman Klein Center para el Internet y la Sociedad de la Universidad de Harvard, psicóloga de formación de la Universidad de Carnegie Mellon en Estados Unidos, con estudios de maestría y doctorado en el Media Lab del MIT. Ha tenido un interés constante por los sistemas que favorecen la creatividad, el conocimiento compartido y el aprendizaje. En su trabajo en el Berkman Klein Center de la Universidad de Harvard ha puesto en marcha nuevas iniciativas educativas como el Instituto de Verano y sprints de investigación que incluyen identidad digital en tiempos de crisis, ética digital en tiempos de crisis, COVID-19 y espacios de aprendizaje sobre acceso a la educación, autodeterminación digital y la clínica de aprendizaje y la clínica de investigación sobre políticas de IA. Actualmente colidera la práctica de políticas y coorganiza el grupo de trabajo Tech Through Spec. Previo a ello, se desempeñó como consultora independiente y asesoró a diversas organizaciones sin ánimo de lucro en temas relacionados con la innovación educativa, acción cívica, diseño creativo basado en tecnologías digitales y alfabetización de datos. Asimismo, ha sido beneficiaria de programas de fellowship como Highlines en Iceland's Media Lab Europe y la International Society for Design and Development in Education. Bueno, en un contexto de transformación acelerada de las tecnologías de inteligencia artificial, incluida la inteligencia artificial generativa, la gobernanza, la ética y la regulación han empezado a cobrar cada vez mayor relevancia de cara a la prevención de los daños y la mitigación de los riesgos que podría suscitar esta tecnología. En concreto, surgen desafíos asociados a temas como el refuerzo a estereotipos y la discriminación en contra de poblaciones tradicionalmente excluidas y vulnerables por motivos de género, raza, políticos, sociales, etc. La atribución de responsabilidad por los efectos de los contenidos generados por la inteligencia artificial generativa. La diferenciación entre el contenido generado por humanos y el generado por la inteligencia artificial generativa. La protección de derechos de propiedad intelectual, tanto frente a las fuentes empleadas por los sistemas de la inteligencia artificial generativa, como por los contenidos generados por estos. La salvaguarda de la privacidad y la seguridad de la información de los usuarios. La diseminación de desinformación o misinformación por la generación de información inexacta y el riesgo de que se comprometan la ética y el pensamiento creativo y crítico en el ámbito educativo y de la investigación. La mayor conciencia de los desafíos señalados ha llevado a diversos países, tanto dentro de América Latina como en otras regiones, a desarrollar marcos regulatorios específicos para la inteligencia artificial que van más allá de regímenes jurídicos como la protección de datos personales y la ciberseguridad, necesarios mas no suficientes para hacer frente a los mismos. Algunas naciones y organizaciones han optado por enfoques regulatorios duros, como es el caso de la Ley de Inteligencia Artificial de la Unión Europea, el AI Act, el proyecto de ley 2338-2023 presentado por la Comisión de Juristas del Senado Federal de Brasil y el proyecto de Chile sobre robótica, inteligencia artificial y tecnologías conexas presentado en abril de 2023. Otros países han optado por enfoques regulatorios blandos, que se centran en la promoción de principios y valores éticos y de buenas prácticas en este sentido. Así, ha habido una adhesión importante a los instrumentos internacionales como la Recomendación sobre la Ética de la Inteligencia Artificial de UNESCO, en 2021, los principios de la OECD en 2019 y los principios del G20 sobre inteligencia artificial en 2019. Sobre la recomendación de UNESCO, cabe destacar cómo esta fue adoptada unánimemente por 193 Estados miembros de la organización y en tal sentido constituye un hito normativo clave para la gobernanza mundial de la inteligencia artificial. En nuestra región, cabe resaltar cómo diversos gobiernos nacionales y locales han expedido marcos éticos para la inteligencia artificial, como es el caso de Brasil, Chile, Colombia, México y Uruguay, y el municipio de Vicente López en Argentina. Con esto damos paso a Elizabeth. Elizabeth, bienvenida. Es un honor de verdad tenerte acá en nuestro evento como conferencista.
Thank you so much. Please forgive me for speaking in English today. I'd like to thank our host, the President Boric, the Government of Chile, the Ministry of Science, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the team at CAF, and the team at UNESCO. And thank you, Maria Isabel, for that warm introduction and for your leadership and the work that you and CAF have been doing. I'm so glad to be in conversation with all of you here today, including the representatives from 23 different countries in Latin America and Caribbean, members from industry, and also my colleagues from academia. So we've heard a lot today about the specific considerations and principles of AI. Now I'm honored to talk about a sub-area, and an important one right now, generative AI, and how we can be thinking about it, the opportunities and risks that may be different or the same as previous AI tools, and actions that decision makers can take. So, generative AI allows us to create new materials like this beautiful garden created by the tool Midjourney. But AI does more than generate. Generative AI does more than generate. And that's an important thing to consider. The term itself is not an ideal term. Before the tools create an image or any other material, they need to do something else. They need to synthesize information, meaning that they need to assemble information in a coherent manner. So this means that the tools can do things that the previous AI tools were not able to do. Not only do they generate beautiful images, they assemble and they grasp information better than what came before. So let's look at a couple of examples. We're all quite familiar with chatbots. This synthesizing and generating allows them to be more natural in how they introduce topics, whether it's travel or shopping. It also means that they can understand more complex information. In this case, it can not only teach, but it can understand a learner's code, a learner's programming code, and then respond to it appropriately. Finally, it can do things, understand things more than facts. They can understand and generate greater subtleties than what came before, like personality and culture and style. This chat interface has taken on the persona of the influencer and model Kendall Jenner. So I want to talk about what's different about this tool or these sets of tools than the tools that came before. AI has been around for a while, and generative AI felt like it appeared out of nowhere and got a huge amount of attention. But what do we really need to be paying attention to, and what's hype? Let's start by looking back a little bit. So AI as a concept goes back to at least the 1950s, but in the 2000s, the pace and improvement increased rapidly, and this is something we've already heard about today. You can see the impression, this progression in the improvements of AI generating images. So these are not pictures, but pictures that were taken with a camera, but that were generated by an AI. And you could see how very quickly these improved, starting with previous tools that were not generative, and in 2024 with the dog there, creating pictures that look much more convincing. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so these are the images. So a lot of this improvement has come from research, as well as improvements to computer hardware and software. But much of the basis of AI, not just generative AI, but earlier kinds, is built upon people labeling information. So this screenshot is from Amazon Turk from 2017. So before we were using generative AI commonly. And what it was, or still is a place where people can get hired online to do very small tasks for very small amounts of money. And if you look, I don't know if you can see, but underneath where it says Amazon Mechanical Turk, it says artificial intelligence, meaning artificial intelligence that is actually human. This is one of the ways that many, many AIs were trained. And actually, you probably have trained an AI, whether you knew it or not. So when we complete a reCAPTCHA, you are training an AI. In this case, you are training an AI to know what's a car. Google uses these reCAPTCHAs to train their AIs. Many of our activities now are used to train AIs wherever we go, through our phones, our cars, what we eat, where we sleep, all of these data points. So this brings me to the first difference: scale. Though generative AI is based on previous kinds, the scale is much greater. And I'll tell you about that in a couple different ways. I'm going to start with the data that the systems are trained upon. So this is an earlier version of ChatGPT. ChatGPT was trained on 45 terabytes of data. That is a huge amount of data. So a terabyte is 1,024 gigabytes, so gigs. It's equivalent to about 45 million books. It's hard to describe how big that is. And here we can also see the content that went into this original, this ChatGPT 3.5 training. 60% of the material was a 13-year archive of the web called Common Crawl. So it's going from one website to the links in the next website in the same way that Google Search was originally created and still powered by. 20% are certain category of all Reddit links. So going to the social network site Reddit and looking at the links that point out, and including ones that have at least 3 likes, have a karma in their language of at least 3. Then 15% is 2 sets of public domain books called Books 1 and Books 2. Many of these public domain books are ones that are older because the copyright has expired. And finally, it has all of Wikipedia, English language Wikipedia only, but that only makes up 5% of the total data. So scale, big. But let's look at this data for a second. There's no data other than text. So no images, no sound, no direct sense of the environment in which we live. It's mostly English content. It's mostly US content. It's a lot of content from the US, from one culture within the United States. And mostly, not 100%, but mostly, a lot of information from this century. Previously, even very recently, I would have said it didn't know anything about very recent history either, but that is starting to change. So history within, say, around the last year. The second thing about scale is that it's extraordinarily expensive to train these models and then to continue to use them. So for example, The estimates are that it costs $700,000 US per day to train and run ChatGPT 3.5, and 4 is probably a little more. Very, very expensive. A third idea about scale. Here's an example of change in speed. So this graph shows how long it took technologies to reach 1 million users. Netflix took 3.5 years, Kickstarter took 2.5 years, Instagram, which seemed unbelievably fast at the time, took 2.5 months. ChatGPT took 5 days to get to 1 million users. This is not what we've seen before. This tool really captured people's imaginations. All right, that gets me to the second difference about generative AI. This speed, this scale, this intense interest has led to disruption. It's disrupting in a variety of ways. So this is one we talk about a lot. It's disrupting text-based knowledge work first. So here I'm showing 3 examples. One is from medicine, one is from the law, and one is from programming. All of these are specialized skills that people develop through a lot of education. And they're ones that both cost a lot to get to those skills, and are well-compensated work. Now, I could have put a lot of other examples here. Maybe you've tried out writing emails or press releases. It's also going to disrupt non-text-based knowledge work, such as design, human translation, language translation. It's going to disrupt a lot of things. And it's going to not only do the things that we already know how to do, it can do things now, today, already, that we can't do. So one of the really most exciting to me changes is protein folding. So this is a tool called AlphaFold 2, all one word, is creating proteins that have never existed before, that humans could not have invented before. More and more, we're going to see innovations like these. And that gets me to the third difference. So how is it that these tools are able to disrupt? Of course, it's the underlying technology. Of course, it's the software and hardware. But the user experience is different. People can use these tools in ways that are more natural and in ways that they understand. So this is a chat GPT interface. When we use these chat tools, they're very different than working with AIs before, or working with software that's really made for technical people or for scientists that you have to tweak a bunch of obscure parameters to make it work. With these tools, we simply type in a conversational way, or we speak now increasingly to the tools directly. So I want to give you some examples of art that Diego, of how this can take on style. They're able to ingest facts and culture together, which is something we talked about previously. So for example, here is Diego Rivera in the metaverse, gardening. This maybe is not something that exists in the world, but it feels something like the art of Diego Rivera. Scale, disruption, and user experience. So what's happening now? We are seeing a lot of technical scaling and large market grabs. So big companies are getting into the market and really trying to capture the imagination. Some of these companies are represented here today. This meant that it's hard for new players to get into the market, but so So people started building on other tools. People started on building the big foundational, on top of the big foundational models. But maybe smaller companies can catch up. This might change. We're finding that smaller foundational models are almost as accurate and less expensive to develop. And this is happening very, very fast. So we can expect more improvements like these. All right, risks and fears. And this was covered quite a bit. So I think if you want to know about this particular example of bias, I'm happy to talk about it later. And similarly, I think surveillance, privacy, data issues was also well covered. But I want to talk about deception. So this is a photo of US soldiers in World War II that doesn't exist. Do we think this is what soldiers looked like in the battlefields of Europe? Do you think they were smiling like this? Similarly, do you think it's legal to kill someone in the US state of Missouri? This bot thinks so. So it's not only possible to fake on an individual level, but to fake social consensus and use that to influence what people think. This is not new, but it's more. This has a lot of implications, these kinds of tools, for labor. We know that AI already limits information to people such as gig workers. We know about IP concerns. For example, the Hollywood strikes in the US, where people being concerned that their content would be taken, their work, their knowledge work, would be taken by these tools. There's controversy about how much labor will be displaced. But I will say that already a very important resource for programmers keeps laying off software engineers. And I don't know whether this will continue, but I would think that regardless of what we know, we will want to prepare for it. People talk a lot about hallucinations and inaccuracies. This is something that happened, but it's already disappearing. So although there's been a lot of focus on it, I would not say that it's a long-term concern. All right, a couple actions to consider. First, we are in a hype cycle. Everybody's very excited. What happens with a hype cycle is inevitable disappointment. We know that. That doesn't mean the tool will not be transformative. This technology has a lot of markings of a transformative tool. After a hype cycle is a fear cycle. We are already primed to have concerns from the media about AI, about robots taking over, about robots taking our jobs. So how do we get ahead of the fear cycle that we anticipate is coming? Well, maybe we might want to consider public information campaigns, educational programs. These sorts of things to get ahead of what's coming might make sense. There's a subtlety here that I'm happy to talk about later, but what I want to say here is that open source is something we hear about. Sometimes we hear it's very good. It can be good. It can be not the right tool. But open is not the same as public. Public data and the use of public data for public good is not the same as open source or open data. So the good news is these smaller models, I think quite possibly could enable regionally developed and supported generative AI. I think it could be possible. No one can predict the future, but it's looking like that might be the case. So what I heard a lot today was about fundamentals, thinking about principles and recommendations from UNESCO, principles from the OECD, and really thinking about how those could work in your region. And I think looking at those and the frameworks and values that you have is probably the right approach. I was very excited to hear how it's being thought about here. I also think it's moving so fast and we can't predict that we may want to also allow for experimentation. So perhaps sandboxing, as I know is already occurring, for example, in Brazil, might be an approach that would be appropriate. I'm not a legislator, I'm not a regulator, I'm just knowing what I see in the technology. So thank you so much. The Berkman Klein Center at Harvard has been thinking about these issues for very many years. We've been advising governments and educating decision makers and early career scholars for quite a while. We do this in collaboration with our collaborators in the Global Network of Internet and Society Centers. And many of the members of this network are here today. So I would be very happy to talk with any of you about this work. And I imagine our collaborators would as well. Thank you very much.